Yeah.
So hello everybody and welcome back to the Primary Care Networks Development Programme in its new form. We were at one point going to be 8 modules in a very interactive approach, but then world events happened and now what we're doing is a series of shorter modules, broadly an hour, where we have participants join us, probably less time than that if we don't, because what we'll do is just do a recording of the content and then you've got the content to use as a whenever you want to, and also in whatever way you'd like to. So just to remind you, my name's Louisa Hardman. I think the last time we met was actually the 3rd of February, but maybe it was in fact before that. Maybe it was the 23rd of November, because I think we didn't actually get to meet in February. So this was our programme as should have been. So we were going to, as I've just described, engage in 8 half-day modules with a close event. But in fact now, of course, we've completely redesigned, completely rethought what we're doing. So now our programme is as follows. And today what we're talking about is building your personal presence. And then the next modules are on influencing for change, giving and receiving feedback, managing through resistance, handling challenging conversations, leading for personal well-being, and managing time. And given the complementary nature of each of these headings, you could either participate in these in order or just simply look at them on a one-off, dependent upon your particular interest. But as I think I've described, each of them will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch them when and if you'd like to. So I guess the key question for today actually is what do any of us need to do to achieve what it says on the module headline, which is building your personal presence? And one way into that is to be thinking about what we mean by presence. But if you're watching this on a recording, you might just want to stop the recording now and think what you mean by personal presence. It's an interesting one, actually. I think many of us think it means somebody that has an impact or presents with confidence or presents with a particular style or stance that's persuasive. And many of us think that we could do to build our personal presence in order to achieve what we want to achieve. The truth is, of course, that we all have presence. We all make an impact. If any of you have done a recent or a slightly further distant 360, you'll already know that the feedback that you'll have received, maybe the feedback you get on a day-to-day basis, is often surprising. And the surprise is quite frequently that we don't know how people see us because we don't sit on the outside of ourselves looking back. We unfortunately sit inside our own skin looking out. So we're never in a position, not ever in a position, to really understand how others experience our presence. In other words, what impact we have on them. So today is an opportunity, this short module is an opportunity to think, what do I mean by personal presence? And what do I think I need to do, if anything, to further strengthen that, to further enhance that, to build that? First of all, then, let's have a look at the dictionary definition of what we mean by presence, just in case there's anything interesting and useful in simply this. So frequently, if we say that somebody has presence, we're meaning this, that they impress you by their appearance and by their manner. There's something of them that you're drawn to, there's something of them that you're impacted by. And it could be that what they say and how they say it is influential and engaging. It could be that their stance and their style makes an impact on you. It could be that their demeanor makes an impact on you. You know, what we're impressed by really varies dependent upon who we are. So there's no one way of being thought to have presence, apart from the fact that we need to realize there is no one way. And in fact, I think the author Oscar Wilde once was quoted as saying, "Be yourself, everybody else is taken." And so maybe the first note to self in terms of developing presence is to recognize that you can't do it like anybody else would. You need to bring yourself, and bringing yourself with confidence and with ease is often one of the single most impressive things we can actually do. But there are other things we can do. And the question of what we mean by presence was, in fact, a piece of research that was explored by a writer called Dr. Peter Hawkins some years ago now, when he was asked to bring some light to the feedback that people were getting from interviews, and the feedback that people were getting when they didn't get the job from many interviews was that they lacked gravitas. And his research was to understand what's meant by gravitas. And the word presence features in his answer to that question. So let's have a short look at his research. So one way of seeing the image that I've now popped on the screen there, which is the triangle, is as if this is a three-legged stool, where one leg is presence, our word for today, the other leg is authority, and the third leg is impact. And all of those combined convey and create a sense of confidence. So in order to understand precisely what he means by presence, let's distinguish what he means by authority, by impact, and by confidence. And as I'm talking about this, obviously, as ever, it's really helpful for you to be thinking about what of what I'm saying you recognize, how what I'm saying resonates with you or doesn't, because this is a very subjective issue, the question of who has presence and whether or not we have presence. There's also a question about what we want to use our presence for. Is it because you want to be recognized and remembered, or do you also maybe want to make an impact on people, as Peter Hawkins is suggesting, because there's an influence that you want to have, maybe for patient care or for the way that services are organized. So if we start to decipher what he's meaning here, authority. What he means by authority is this. It's the sum total of achievements, every piece of positive feedback you've ever been given, every success you've ever clocked up, every supportive email that you've ever received, every notable experience that you've navigated your way through that's gone well. For him, this means all your past achievements. They are what together create a sense of the authority that you bring in to the room, to the meeting, to the interaction. It's as if this is what gives you permission. It's your license to practice. It's what gives you the right to have a perspective, the right to have a view. Another writer, not Dr. Peter Hawkins, but in the field of what's called somatic coaching, have translated this into something that's really memorable. And they describe this collection of all your achievements as your dragon's tail. And the idea is that all your historic positive achievements and experiences are somehow rooted in this weighty, stylish, significant dragon's tail. And when you walk into an online meeting or you walk into an in-person meeting, you swish your dragon's tail in order to remind yourself that you're entering this conversation with the right to be there and the right to have a view. Now, clearly, as you can see, that's one edge of confidence, giving ourselves permission, feeling legitimate, not being curtailed by a sense of imposter syndrome, for example, which would be the opposite of authority. And then we come to presence. And interestingly, what Peter Hawkins means by presence, and you can see this is another angle on authority, is two things. And it's two things that we're going to look at during this module. On the one hand, presence is simply being present, whether or not you are genuinely in the room, whether or not you're genuinely in the conversation, the extent to which you're paying attention, the extent to which you're actually focusing. Many of us are so busy that we're permanently distracted and spend a lot of our lives thinking about what's the next thing we need to be doing, or what's the next place we need to be at, rather than being fully in this place or in this conversation or in this meeting. And so presence looks like somebody being aware. It looks like they're listening. It looks like they've really turned up and chosen to be in the conversation. It doesn't look like somebody being distracted or absent or somehow conflicted in terms of where their diary is telling them they need to be. So one aspect of this is being present. Another aspect to this is having presence, the extent to which somebody brings their full expressiveness, the extent to which somebody communicates in a way that suggests that they have a point of view that needs to be taken seriously. So we're going to be looking at both of those two perspectives on presence, how you can have presence and how you can be present. And just finishing his thinking, he was saying that each of these sources of confidence relates to a particular time in history or a particular point of a timeline. So authority relates to what we bring with us from our past. Presence is very much about how and who we are in the moment of now. And impact, which I'll explain in a moment, relates to where you're going. So the final angle on confidence that really touches in with presence is impact. And impact for Peter Hawkins means your ability to convey what you want to achieve, your ability to engage and enroll colleagues with your own excitement about the potential that your work is going to deliver. It's a sense of a future that you're able to communicate. In other words, the impact that you want to have and in what domain. So each of these three things then, really important, but for the purpose of our focus today, we're going to be essentially exploring the having presence and being present that I mentioned earlier. So let's move into both of those two. And you can see here on screen that I've offered you this relationship in a yin-yang form. So the being present and the having presence, both sides of the same coin, but they actually lead to quite different activities and quite different ways of thinking about presence. So if you're wanting to really practice being present, I'll give you in a moment an exercise that you can use to do this. But let me first explain what some of the elements of being present are. So I think as we were talking earlier, Dr. Peter Hawkins' notion of authority, presence and impact indicates that being present is something to do with the quality of your attention. People know that you're genuinely in the room or in the conversation with them because of the way in which you interact or intervene, the observations that you make, the things that you might notice. And actually being present in this sense, paying attention, is fundamentally important to patient care. So just a couple of pieces of research that you're probably familiar with, but that are worth factoring in to our thinking about being present. One is Dr. Kate Granger's work, whose campaign, Hello, My Name is probably something that you're very aware of. And in fact, actually, if you look at your NHS lanyard, you might find that your lanyard actually has Hello, My Name is on there. And if that's the case, you may know this story, but Dr. Kate Granger sadly passed away through cancer. And as a clinician, one of the things that she realized was that it's not just the quality of medical intervention that makes a difference to how a patient feels, how she felt on a day-to-day basis. It was the quality of interaction. It was how distracted or available the clinician felt. And I'm sure all of us can relate to this. It was, in other words, how present they were with her. And she found that one way of encouraging that real sense of somebody paying attention to me as a patient was simply by asking each person that she met to tell her their name. And she translated that into the campaign, Hello, My Name Is, whereby every patient action starts with that mutual introduction, which otherwise can be missing and can otherwise leave a patient feeling very isolated and very unmet by another human being. And that, of course, relates to Dr. Michael West's research, his thinking and his work being on compassionate care. And I think what's surprising about compassionate care is the importance of the simple act of listening and paying attention. And in fact, he says there are 4 ingredients to compassionate care, which, by the way, he also says staff need to experience from one another in order to be able to offer to patients authentically. But the 4 qualities or the 4 characteristics start with paying attention. And he says sometimes that is what can be described as being present. So paying attention, being present, and then that moves on to really understanding what somebody's saying to us. And then that creates empathy, because it's only if we've got empathy that we can really be helpful in a way that a patient might consider to be genuinely helpful. And I remember talking to clinicians in other programs about this and how easy it is to fall into the trap of thinking that you know what's good for another person, as opposed to really exploring what they think good looks like in terms of next stages in their treatment for them. So this whole notion of being present, on the face of it, just sounds like stopping and showing up. But actually, it's making a decision to genuinely be with another person or genuinely be in the moment. And this is, of course, why there's so much work being done at the moment around mindfulness. The simple act of pausing in our lives and paying attention to the experience that we're having. Now, if you're wanting to develop this kind of presence, then the skills of listening are a really empowering and enabling way of starting. And I'm going to offer you an exercise that you might like to do with colleagues in a different context, or if you're watching this module with colleagues, you might like to stop the recording and have a go at this. But the essence is about the different levels of listening. And there are 3 levels of listening that we can bring to any conversation and any experience that we have. The first level of listening is where I'm just listening to the content. So I'm just tracking what it is that somebody's saying, the facts, the details, and being able to understand that and potentially summarize that back. But it's not that level of listening that generally makes another human being feel that you're present with them. There are 2 other levels of listening that create that experience. So the second level of listening is where you listen to the emotion. So what are the feelings behind the fact? Now, what does the tone suggest to you that somebody might be actually experiencing? So are they sounding frustrated? Are they sounding cynical? Are they sounding hopeful? Are they sounding jovial? Actually to be able to empathize with not the facts, but the feeling of another human being is where we start to be genuinely present with another person. And then the final level of listening is where you're listening to the level of intention. So not just what they're saying and not just how they're saying it, the feeling behind how they're saying it, but what it is that they're telling you, what they're saying for. What's behind their story to you, or behind the way in which they're talking to you, or what do you think they're intending to do as a consequence, or what do you interpret they want from you, that's an even deeper level of listening. So the exercise that you might like to think about or practice is this, where you would work in pairs, where person A takes 3 minutes to tell person B about the work-related issues on their mind right now, just that. And I'm sure there are many of those. Person B then listens with what Nancy Klein, whose book The Thinking Environment is very popular, talks or describes as listening with fascination, which is a sort of lovely phrase, I think. How can we make and encourage others to feel really listened to by bringing our fascination, our real curiosity. And then after person A spoken for 3 minutes, person B takes 2 minutes to summarize back what they think A said, the content, then what they think A feels about what they said, and then what they think A intends to do about what they said. And this is really interesting to do this as an exercise, because it's surprising how some of us do listen mostly to content, but not so much to feelings and intention. Others of us listen mostly to feelings and not so much to the detail or the intention. And also, finally, some of us do listen to the intention, but maybe not so much to the other levels. So this is an encouragement for you to be clearer about your own level or focus of listening, and which of the levels might be helpful for you to gear up a bit so that you can genuinely switch yourself on to be present in an experience or a conversation, but also so that you can encourage other people to feel that you're present with them in the conversation or in the discussion. So you might now like to turn the recording off and just give that a little bit of thought. If you're in a clinical role, you might think, but I do this every day. What's fascinating, actually, I think, is the skills that we use in a clinical context, we often don't use in the context of working with colleagues, and sometimes we don't use them at home. So as well as thinking about where do I use these 3 levels of listening in order to be fully present, you can also be thinking about which of these you might use variably in those different environments. And that's, I think, quite interesting. I know, for example, that at home with my partner, I am much more interpretive about his intention than I am listening to the content of what he actually says. And he often tells me off for not really having heard what he said, but just quickly going to what he's going to do about it or what he should do about it. So it might be interesting and a bit playful for you to think in those terms as well. So what I was saying is that there are these 2 aspects to presence. One is being present, the other is having presence. So let's move on now to the issue of having presence. And for this, I'd like to introduce you to 2 really helpful and complementary different perspectives. And they're all about how you can make an impact, how you can, going back to the dictionary definition, leave an impression on other people in terms of what you say or how you say it. And therefore, this is proxy, isn't it, for being more influential simply through your presence. Again, I'm just going to introduce you to some ideas, and then there's an exercise for you to have a play with if you'd like to, certainly to think about, even if you don't get round to doing the exercise. So there is an artist who is an acting tutor who works with the National Theatre, called Patsy Rodenberg, and she talks about 3 circles of presence. And I'd like to talk you through these circles and ask you to think about how you might show up, particularly in some of the most challenging environments that you operate in. So circle 1 is basically where you're slightly collapsed in on yourself, where you're essentially talking as if to yourself. You're not really engaging with the other people that are with you. It might suggest or convey a lack of confidence or a feeling of awkwardness, but it tends to be too little presence. Circle 3 is the opposite. It's where I'm overly expressive, even to the point of potentially being a bit intimidating, leaning into the screen, leaning over the table, so causing you to feel a little bit like you want to lean back. I almost consume space, I take space, I'm overly exuberant, and I'm, again, not really talking with you, I'm talking beyond you, as if I'm making a statement to the world to impress, but not necessarily to engage. So I might be talking in very grandiose terms about, I want to make sure that everybody is part of this conversation, but I'm not looking at anybody. And so nobody feels part of the conversation. And that's where Patsy Rodenberg settles on circle 2, which is where you are engaged, you're talking not to yourself or to the wider world, you're actually engaged with the audience that you're interacting with. If you're working online, of course, it involves looking at the green dot of your camera rather than down at your notes, because that conveys that you're maintaining eye contact and connection. It's also being slightly more animated, but not over exuberant and not under expressive. So again, an easy and interesting way of thinking which circle of presence you might be occupying in many of your conversations, or even to think which circle of presence do you need to bring to a particular conversation that you find challenging, because often we might move into circle 1 where we're challenged, or even circle 3, as opposed to focusing on circle 2. Now, again, there are some other very helpful things to think about in terms of holding steady on circle 2. So what we know in terms of face-to-face presence is that there are some surprising statistics. We tend to, when we're wanting to present, have presence, we tend to focus on preparing what we're going to say, the content of what we're going to say. But all the research evidence, and I'd like to ask you now to think about your own experience of somebody really engaging you. What was it that somebody did that really engaged you? It's likely to have been not just what they said, it's likely to have been almost how they said it. And you know, the tone and cadence of our expression can make such a difference to the message that somebody receives. I'll illustrate. I didn't say Jack did it. I didn't say Jack did it. I didn't say Jack did it. That's the same sentence. The meaning is only changed by the tonality. So we really do need to prepare for not just what we say, but also how we say it vocally, and then how we say it through our overall demeanour, which is 55% of what we're communicating. We tend to recognise this when we don't really think somebody means what they're saying. So, you know, the classic one would be me saying to each of you now, oh, I really value this opportunity to have a conversation with you, and I'm looking at my watch or looking at my notes. My body language isn't consistent with my message. And what do you believe? What really makes an impact on you? It's not the words, it's actually the signals that I'm sending through the way that my body language is communicating with you. So a really practical encouragement, if you want to have presence, is to make sure that you do prepare what you're going to say, but you also prepare how you're going to deliver it vocally and how you're going to sit or stand to convey that, so that there is this congruence between the message and the messenger. And then the final way of thinking about presence, which goes back to Patsy Rodenberg, the drama tutor, are these 4 reminders about what we need to bring to every communication in order to have real presence. So yes, to prepare, particularly to think about the way we use our voice. And she talks about these 4 Ps needing to be features of the way we communicate if we want to communicate with real presence, have presence. The first is pitch. So is your voice a little high where it needs to be low? The classic example of this that comes to my mind, if you recall, is Margaret Thatcher when she first came to power. Her voice pitch was actually quite high, and reports say that she had elocution lessons which made her voice lower. And if you listen to her early years and her later years, you can absolutely hear the slightly squeaky Margaret Thatcher who started, that then moves to the rather lower pitch and the stronger emphasis. And again, what she also illustrates is pace. Her delivery became slower. One of the things I think we recognize is that anybody who delivers rather hurriedly is probably nervous and is just focused on delivering the message and going. Whereas confident presence is conveyed by an individual who can take their time and modulate their pace so that individuals who are listening can digest what they're saying before they rush on to the next sentence. And of course, a part of that is the next word, which is pause. How long do you leave it between completing one sentence and starting another sentence? Do you tend to rush over things without breath? A really interesting way of checking on yourself is not just to read something that you're going to deliver, but to practice delivering it out loud. Because when you hear how quickly you might be saying what you're wanting to say, you'll likely hear that there's very little time that you're creating that people can use to really absorb, digest, and assimilate the content of your delivery. And then the final thing is power. Are you a little bit low energy in your delivery so that you don't use your voice as well as you might? And the great tip here from Patsy Rodenberg is what's called diaphragmatic breath. So if you pop your hands on the bottom of your ribs on both sides of your torso and you take a breath, just notice where you're breathing from. If you're breathing from the top half of your lungs, your voice is likely to be quite strained and your vocal cords are probably going to be either slightly gravelly, like mine can be, or a bit higher. Whereas if now you take an inhalation and you pop your hands on either side of the torso, you can probably hear in my voice how that simple breath makes my voice sound smoother and probably louder slightly, more powerful, in other words. Now, if you wanted to practice some of what I'm saying here, then please feel free to take any one of these ideas away and have a go. Interesting to actually get some feedback. So even better, if you would like to find a colleague with whom you can do something like this exercise. So working in, it could be pairs, could be trios. Each person takes a minute to speak about something that they feel passionate about. Honestly, here the content doesn't matter at all. It could just be something that you like or care about. The last time I did this exercise, somebody mentioned their passion for apple muffins, for example. So it absolutely doesn't need to be something of great significance. It's just something that you feel some energy for. And at the end of the minute, it could equally be 30 seconds actually, your colleague or colleagues then give you one piece of feedback about what you can do to strengthen your presence. Now that might be around circle 1, circle 2, circle 3. It could be about your content, or it could be about your tone, or it could be about your body language, or it could be about pace, power, pause, and pitch. The idea being that the feedback is in service of you building your presence even more strongly. So then you take that feedback and have another practice only for 30 seconds, really focusing there on whatever aspect of the feedback you've received that would strengthen your presence. So some ideas here for you on presence, just to finish by saying the obvious, we all have presence already. This short module isn't about changing your presence so that you change your personal style or character. It's about building on the strengths that you have. And the question that I'd like to ask you to think through is, what then practically do you take from this workshop to strengthen yours? Is it that you need to be present more? And what would that require? And what could you do to be present more? Is it that it would be also, or alternatively, helpful for you to build presence, to have presence in the sense of creating that impression on other people? Please give that some thought. Healthcare often depends on influence to improve services, to improve quality, to improve patient outcomes. And sometimes it's not only the great ideas that create influence and lead to change, it's the messenger. And for that, being present and building presence are absolutely key. I hope this has been fruitful as a short think piece, and look forward to recording my next module for you and sending that over. Bye bye for now.